Unit 4 under the optimal capital structure. And what we're trying to look here is, now that we've decided a firm has to go to the optimal capital structure, what kind of design the debt needs to have. How do you design what kind of firms are able to raise enough debt, and B, if you have capacity and the need to raise debt, what kind of debt should you go ahead and raise? How do you really justify what kind of debt has been raised, right? So that's what we are basically going to look at and understand how do we design the debt that comes across to us. The first thing that we need to answer is, what are the determinants of a company's capital structure and the policy around that, right? So there are some key determinants of the capital structure of the firm, and we will try and understand them one by one. So there are four major determinants of the capital structure. The first one is the tax rate. Remember, tax gives you the debt gives you a tax benefit. So higher the tax rate, we did our calculation at a 30% rate. If the benefit was at a 40% or a 50%, higher the tax rate, higher the tax benefit, higher the debt firms will want to raise, since the benefit is higher. So bigger the tax benefit that you get, bigger your chances of raising more debt, and consequently bigger debt equity ratios firms would be able to manage and have, because you would want to kind of optimize the benefits you get out of higher debt, right? The next bit that comes in is what happens to the cash flows. So companies with stable cash flows and companies with high cash flows, or companies with growing cash flows, find it easier to borrow more. And that's logical. If your cash flows are stable, if your cash flows are high, if your cash flows are growing, if you're in any of the industries which are known for their stability, for example, auto industry or FMCG industry in India, then you would have a capability or capacity to borrow more, and hence you will find it easier to reach to the optimal capital structure should a need around that arise, right? The third major determinant comes around the operating risk. Right? To understand this, we need to understand the concept of high operating leverage. Firms which have high fixed cost will see bigger earnings volatility. Why is that? Let's take the example of a firm that has a sales of 100 and costs of 80. What is the earnings? 20. Now, if sales goes up to 120, remember it has a lot of fixed cost. So let's say cost remains fixed, all of the cost is fixed. Earnings go to 40. The change in sales is 20%, but the change in earnings is 100%. Correct? This kind of a firm is considered to have a higher fixed cost, and hence what is called as a higher operating leverage. If the sales were to fall to 80, you will note that costs will remain the same, profits go to zero. So if the sales go down by minus 20%, profits go down by minus 100%. So earnings volatility is much bigger in firms with higher fixed cost structure, or what is known as higher operating leverage. And in these kind of cases, firms will have lesser capacity to borrow money. They'll not be able to borrow too much, because if there is a risk that comes up, you will probably end up in losses, and then the chances of default increase. So these kind of firms typically will tend to have lower capacity to borrow. It's a different issue that, some of these firms are already saddled with debt in real life, right? Finally, risk premiums. If risk premiums rise, what are risk premiums? Equity risk premium as well as risk premium of debt securities. Risk-free rate or government security is 7.0%. A company might be borrowing money at 8%. If the debt risk premium increases, this 8% might become 9%. Correct? That's the premium you were asking, that extra 1%. Now, if that premium increases, the firm will have to pay more. So essentially, if risk premiums rise, firms will be able to borrow lesser. So in an environment where risk premiums